Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Barbell Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Christina Lynn, and I'm here with my co-host, Marissa Roy. And in today's episode, we're piggybacking. We are piggybacking off of the last episode where we were talking a little bit about the dial mentality. And today we're going to be talking about how stress impacts your fat loss goals.
Yes, because at the end of the day, like when it comes to life happening and things coming up and stress being a part of our life, like that is just a part of our life. Stress happens. But I think it's really important to understand stress holistically because there are aspects about it that we cannot change, but there are many aspects that we can control. And it's really important to analyze that because stress can have a direct or indirect impact on fat loss, on our results, on what we're seeing in the mirror, our body composition, which is a tough, I guess, truth to come to terms with, but it is the reality of how our physiology works.
Yeah. And I've been talking with a lot of clients about this recently. So I think it is really, really good to take a deeper dive into, because I think what's really hard, at least from from my experience too, personally in dealing with this, but it can feel really frustrating because it's like when you're not hitting your nutrition, you're not going to the gym. It's like, okay, I know why I'm not making progress. Like you can clearly physically see it and you're like, okay, the problem is me.
Yeah.
But when you are doing all those things and you're not seeing progress or you're regressing, it's like, what the fuck? Like, what am I doing wrong? I don't understand. And you hear about how stress can impact your fat loss goals, but it's hard to really see it because it's just this like abstract term. It's like stress. And so it's like, what does that mean? What does it look like? How are you feeling? Like, how does that manifest in different areas? So I feel like it's almost kind of harder to address. So having a really good understanding and being able to pick things out and see where, oh, okay, like I see it here, I see it here, I see how it's showing here, and then being able to tackle those things and then start seeing progress is really, really awesome. Because it's like you get to get the progress going again.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess like I always like whenever we discuss stress, because I feel like this is a topic I always like to revisit every couple of months because it's just life, is defining the types. So we have multiple types of stress. You might think, no, life is just stressful. What do you mean? No, there are types of stress. And so the biggest two categories are going to be like perceived stress, like mental stress versus physical or physiological stress, and then the duration. So the type and then the duration. The duration is acute versus chronic. So I'll start with acute versus chronic. Acute stress is short-lived stress. So if you're in, let's say you're in school and let's see, it's the beginning of May, it's finals week. Finals week is 1 week of your life. So there's a start and there's an end, and you know that it's coming to an end and you just kind of need to push through, or you're going through a move, or you are temporarily, or even something as short as a workout on your body is acute stress. But then chronic stress is long-term stress. So if you are in a toxic work environment, if you're in a toxic relationship, if you are spending years and years and years, stress on your body can come from being overweight and being unhealthy. So years and years of being unhealthy and overweight is chronic stress on your body. And so there is acute and there's chronic. So keep those two separate in your mind. And then there is perceived versus physiological or physical. So perceived stress is the feeling of stress. Like I feel stressed. I'm mentally like freaking out about this. Versus physical stress is, like I said, going to do a workout. You wouldn't honestly think that that is a stressor, but going to do a workout, ripping your muscle fibers apart is stress. Getting sick is physical stress on the body. And maybe you might, in addition, psychologically perceive stress about being sick because it's going to slow you down and it's going to make things harder. But there are two separate types with that, perceived and physiological.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to point out because you can have two people who are going through the exact same experience, whether it is a workout or toxic work environment or whatever, whatever it may be. And you have two people who can handle it completely different. So for the example, like being physically sick, it's like you have one person who's like, oh my God, woe is me. This is the worst thing ever. Like how I think you can tell a lot about how someone talks about things. Like I have a client who, this was the worst thing ever. This was the week from hell. This was that, this was this. And having that conversation, like, was it really that bad? Or like, are you perceiving it? Or like, if it really wasn't that bad, like, how about we change our language around it? Because I feel like, I mean, I know that you are the queen of language and how we say things, but I feel like that really does change like how we perceive things and like how our body perceives it as well. It's like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to do this. And this means this is ruined and this is that, versus someone who's sick and they're like, all right, yeah, I can't train this week, but like, cool. That means I have more time at home with family. Like I've really been wanting to watch that movie. Like now I have an excuse to. So it's like the same thing, but just two very, very, very different responses to the same stressor.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's because we might have different thresholds for perceived stress. And that is shaped by so many things. It can be shaped by all your life experiences on top of your nervous system and how reactive you are kind of just naturally to things based on all the life experiences that you've been through, and just what your kind of perspective is. So, we're not here to necessarily go into all of that, but just know that that affects how you perceive stress. So if you are somebody like, I guess the most extreme example would be like, if you think about David Goggins, um, accidentally sleeping in. Like, is he going to be like super like frazzled and like off his kilter because he slept in by an extra hour or something on accident? Probably not, because he's been through so much shit. What has he done? Like ran like 100 miles with like broken feet or something like.
Yeah, he does ultras. He is wild. But also like as soon as you said David Goggins, like all I can hear is like the voice in my head now.
Yeah. But basically, right, you know how hardcore he is, you know how much shit he puts himself through. And so for a small thing to go wrong in his life, he might really just not be thrown off by it. But somebody who maybe just doesn't have that level of resiliency to stress might be really frazzled by something small. And so just knowing like what is your threshold for stress, I would just encourage you to just kind of be aware of it, and start to recognize like what kind of sets you off, what gets you going down a spiral, what gets you really, really stressed out, and just try to build awareness around that, because then you can start to cultivate and curate what you want your reactions and responses to be in the future. Because you can't necessarily change the fact that something stresses you out. Like that's just like a lifetime's worth of work. But you can change how you then respond to it, and truly trying to give yourself some perspective about that stressor in the moment if you're able to catch that.
Yeah, and I don't want to go down this deep rabbit hole of like exposing yourself to hard things, right? And like
But
doing
yeah,
those things. I mean, it is really important, but it's like I think that the amount of stress and things that you're able to handle definitely does change based on your life experiences and things that you go through. And then I know that that's one of the reasons why we talk about prep. Like prep taught me so much more about myself, and I feel like I am able to handle more things and feel like I'm more capable of handling harder things, and that's helped a lot again with my stress perception. um, but I just think that kind of, as you get older, you just have more and more added to your plate and you're able to do it. But I think the analogy that you've kind of given a few times is like, we have like a glass, and it's like you can have work stress and you pour it into the glass and it's a little bit, and then you have personal stress, and then you have relationship or whatever, you have stress that you're putting your physical body through with workouts, and it's like it fills up and fills up and fills up, and it gets to a point where, like, let's say we add a move on top of all those things, it's like eventually it gets to that point where it spills over. And I think that's really what I want to talk about today is like, okay, what happens, or like what are the physical changes that we can see when we have that spill over. But just kind of knowing that it's stress isn't just oh, I'm stressed. It's like all these different factors, all these different areas of your life that can contribute.
Yeah, well, the thing I love about that analogy is that you were talking about like building resiliency to stress. And when you build resiliency to stress, it's that cup or that container that the water is getting poured into. It's just getting bigger. That container gets bigger. You can handle more over time. But no matter how big your container is, you are not infinite. So there is a spillover point, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
what, like, let's just say like life has added up to that point and it's Murphy's law and a million things are happening all at once to you. So what do we do when we're kind of spilling over? And I think my perspective on this is I always like to just go back to what is in my control that I could pull back on. So I actually have a really great example now that we're on this topic. I didn't even realize, but I have a client who she's been freaking crushing it for a really long time. And she has not hit a breaking point, but just been tired. Like just tired of dieting, tired of same things over and over again, tired of her work, just piling way too much on her plate, tired of all of it. And in her check-in this past week, she was just like, I'm just going to take the night off of the gym. And I'm just going to go to Panera with my husband and just eat a meal and like not worry about it. And I was like, in fact, I not only want you to do that, but we're also going to have a diet break this week. And we're also going to, you're also going to take a bubble bath and you're also going to pull back on X, Y, and Z. And I kind of like even further took the stress off her body because let's kind of analyze the situation here. She's been dieting for a really, really long time. So that's physical stress on the body. There's a ton of work stress for a long period of time. That's chronic perceived stress and a lot more that I won't go into. But basically, what I was able to look at and control from my end was, well, how much of a calorie deficit we're in can really impact how much stress your body is under trying to make do with less than ideal amounts of food. So let's go into a diet break to just take that stress off of your body, take a couple extra days off the gym, rest. And even though training stress is good, this situation is not normal. And if we continue pushing and pushing and pushing through the situation, you will most likely run into burnout or injury. So let's pull back now with the areas that we can control, even if it's pulling back good stressors for your health and your body. Too much is still too much, no matter if the inputs are good or bad, quote unquote. And so I think that was like what we did. I think she's already starting to feel better and just being able to kind of get that off her chest too. But just a great example of like control what you can and look for when you understand stress holistically, physical, psychological, then you're able to pull back wherever you can. You have more options.
Yeah. I have a client of mine who we were in contest prep, and this was her second season. So the first season, she responded a little bit differently because she didn't know what to expect. And she's just kind of like along for the ride. And she ended up doing really well. She ended up winning like a Europa. And so the second season, we were kind of like, cool, we're going to nationals. Like we're in it to win it. And the first few weeks of prep were awful. Like really hard. She was like, oh my gosh, I'm freaking out. I'm not going to be ready. Like, what if we're not ready by the show date? What if and then I finally was like, then we're not ready. And then we pick a different show. And she's like, oh. And I was like, yeah, this show would be great to do, but if we have to push back, it's okay. And we'll move on. And she's like, okay, cool. I was like, yeah, so let's just prep. Like, let's just do it again. She's like, all right. And that next check-in, I swear, it looked like she had progressed like a month difference. Like you could see just like everything, like she was less inflamed, like she wasn't holding on to like any water. Like you could just see the release of her body. And so it's like, we didn't change anything. We didn't change anything as far as protocols, nutrition, training, everything was the same, but it's, hey, let's just take this pressure off of you. And once we did that, it was amazing to see how our body responded. So I love stories like that.
That's really cool. Yeah. And
Yeah.
just the impact that perceived stress can have on your body holding weight, right? And so this is
Mm-hmm.
something that I think is really more common than I would like for it to be. But
Yeah.
we have clients that are working towards fat loss in their journeys with us. One thing that can really, really hold them back if they're super perfectionistic, super type A, kind of like a worry bug, uh, what can really shoot them in the foot is stressing about losing weight. And literally
Mm-hmm.
the stress of wanting to lose weight faster, not losing it fast enough. Am I doing everything right? Second guessing everything that they do is literally the thing that holds them back from seeing the progress in the first place, which is really frustrating because how do you tell someone that, first and
Yeah.
foremost?
You care too much.
Yeah, and second of all, it's literally the high, well, here's what it is. It's the high attachment to the outcome of this has to happen this way. It needs to look exactly like this, and the weight needs to change by this much. And when that's not happening, you're met with more stress and more disappointment and more pressure. Whereas focusing on the process of, am I doing everything that my coach is telling me to do? And if I am doing that, I will let go of the outcome and allow my coach to adjust the protocols if it's needed. Otherwise, I'm just going to trust that the results will come, which is really hard to do when you like control and you like to know the outcome. But you could literally be shooting yourself in the foot by doing the former.
Yep. Yeah. And yeah, exactly. Because it's like you want a client that cares a lot, but then it's like trying to take that focus away from, yes, I hear that you want to lose 20, 30 pounds, but like let's focus on the journey and like let's focus on the week to week and controlling what you can control. But removing those outcomes and expectations can make a really, really big difference. And I think the other thing too is and that's why like handling the expectations, right? Like what is or isn't realistic can make a really big difference because I mean, I've had clients who are like, oh, man, I'm losing 2 pounds a week and I can't believe I'm not making progress. And as a coach, you're like, what? You're like, no, you're doing awesome, but that client doesn't think that they are. And so that can make a really big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's just more pressure, more stress.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I guess like basically we kind of covered just the big, I think the big hitter is stressing about the outcome, but another like just when there's a lot of stress going on, whether it be physical, perceived, or both, one of the ways that it does get in the way of progress is through inflammation, like water retention.
Mm-hmm.
I think your example was great for that, like the contest prep competitor, because you can more easily see when water's held into the skin with them because they're just leaner. But inflammation. And so, inflammation to an extent is a good thing. So, for example, when you go do a heavy leg day, your legs are going to be inflamed for the next 24, 48, 72 hours. That's a good thing. You want that level of inflammation. And that is inflammation from the stress of training that eventually subsides. But if you have a super big freak out mentally and emotionally, and you are super stressed, high strung, your nervous system is on fight or flight mode 24/7, you're also generating inflammation just within your body as a whole. And that can cause water retention. That can cause your cortisol hormone, your stress hormone, to skyrocket up and just ramp up a lot of systems in your body that don't need to be turned on all the time and cause you to, in the short term, mobilize resources like carbohydrates, maybe burn more calories. So, like, sometimes people kind of joke that they like lose weight when they're stressed because they don't have an appetite or they don't eat or they just are stressed all the time, and that's how their body runs. But if you let that go chronically, eventually your cortisol and that bodily response crashes, and it can cause you to store extra body fat, and it can cause you to kind of go into this like crashed out like repair mode where your body's kind of like exhausted, running on fumes, and really, really resistant to the stress of a caloric deficit, the stress of exercise. And that's where a lot of like metabolic not metabolic issue, I guess metabolic issues and like weight loss resistance can come from, is that chronic stress.
Mm-hmm.
So that comes from a principle that I've talked about on a few episodes in the past, but the general adaptation syndrome by Hans Sale, which is like from the 40s or something, 1940s, but it's just a basic principle of how our nervous system and our system adapts to stressors. And it comes in 3 phases: alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. So you can probably piece together which of the 3 phases line up with what I just described. But this is every system in your body is interconnected and responds to prolonged stress in this way. And that can really, really impact fat loss in the long run.
Yeah. And something that you can see a lot too is like, not like, so when we talk about like it can, the increased cortisol can lead to increased fat storage. So I also see this particularly around like the midsection and the abdomen. Like
Mhm.
I feel like sometimes that can be a telltale sign. But also, again, I'm thinking of a couple clients in particular where nothing has changed as far as nutrition or training, but then their body composition starts to change, and they start to change a little bit with like their weight because they're inflamed and they're holding on to water. And again, it can be really scary because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing anything and I'm gaining weight, and my physique is changing. And the other thing that it starts to do, it starts to hinder your insulin sensitivity. And so
Mhm.
you might see your blood sugar start to increase, like fasting and after meals. So it does change a lot of ways that your body processes just like normal everyday things. So again, it can feel really hard because you're not making any changes, but your body is changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, and then that's where you kind of run into the situation where like I'm doing all the things and nothing's moving and my body's broken, it's working against me. And guess what? That causes more stress.
Yes.
And so unfortunately, yeah, I've worked with a good handful of people that have kind of run themselves into this hole, and it is a really, really toxic cycle to get out of. And it's really hard because it's like it's considering all angles of stress, not only like the perceived day-to-day stress of like, do I feel stressed right now, but also like what's my underlying belief about this situation. Like if I just believe that I'm stuck in this situation, it's never going to change, like how does that just like add a cloud over everything? It does contribute to stress. And it just makes me think of like that person, like you imagine they're meditating and you're like, are you stressed? And they're like, I'm not stressed. Right? And they're like angry and stressed, but they're just saying that I don't feel stressed. I don't feel stressed, but I'm malfunctioning, right? Like it's
Everything's fine.
yeah, it's the everything's fine, my girl is on fire type of person. So
Yeah.
it's tough because it's like you can't tell that person to calm down. You can't tell that person to just relax. Like it really does take some like unraveling of like beliefs about like how the world works and like your worldview as a whole and like how you think things are working for you or against you. And it's a lot. So, I mean, if you're in that hole, I feel for you. And just know that there is a way out and you don't have to stay stuck in that. But you do have to be really, really open minded, probably more open minded than you've been in the past, and probably have to fight yourself a little bit to get there. Cause like I imagine just sitting in that position, hearing that, being like, I am open minded, like I want to change, but at the end of the day, like I think it's just continuing to like stay curious with yourself rather than trying to like beat new beliefs into your brain.
Yeah, and it's not I love the videos where it's like my husband cured my anxiety but by telling me to calm down or not to worry. And you're like, I'm cured. But yeah, it's not just like a, oh, okay, snap my fingers and all of a sudden I'm not stressed anymore. Like you said, it's like a lot of beliefs that we have to change. And we talk a lot about, the fixed versus growth mindset. And again, it's not just like, oh, okay, now I know what a growth mindset is. Now I've just adopted it. It's like, no, like it takes a lot of intentional work to try to change and be like, okay, I'm not a victim in this circumstance, or like, we talk about some things just suck, right? Like, let's say you get fired,
Yeah.
or like you get into an accident, right? A car accident, you were at fault, right? It's like, you don't you don't just get out and you're like, oh my gosh, everything's fine, I'm fine, like, and
Yeah,
like,
that's delusion.
yeah. But like you might just get up and be like, ah, fuck. Or you have that moment of like, this sucks, like I'm in my feels, but then it's like, okay, I'm giving myself 5 minutes to like wallow in my pity or whatever. But then it's like, cool. now what? Like, what can I do? How can I get out of this situation? Cool. I can call insurance, or, okay, cool. Like, actually, I didn't even really like that job anyway. So let me start looking for new ones, or, oh, cool. Now I actually have time to go travel and see so and so before, it's like, so just having those moments, but then like, how do you react to them and how do you perceive them? But that takes time. That's just like, I mean, I know that I used to kind of feel a little bit of that victim mentality, and it wasn't until I got a little bit older, I don't know if it was just figuring out how the world works, or like, oh, the world does not revolve around me, but like I was able to change the way I thought about things, and that has helped a ton.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I don't really have much to add on that.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was thinking about too is, we were talking a lot about like cortisol and like how stress like affects us physically. Like another thing that I was thinking about is like usually what happens again if we're experiencing chronic stress, acute. I mean, I guess this could happen too with acute, depending on the circumstances. But a lot of times when we are stressed, it affects our sleep a lot.
Mhm.
And this could be either like with work, we're working longer hours and we're having to stay up later, or we are so stressed that we're not sleeping as well. Like it's just kind of disrupting that sleep. And so that can affect fat loss as well, because if we're not sleeping well, that's going to change our hunger hormones. It's going to lead to cravings throughout the day. It's going to lead to reduced energy. And then stress also makes you feel fatigued. So like mentally, physically, and then you're not sleeping well. And so like all of these things just like compound, and I feel like make it just like harder and harder and harder for you to dig yourself out of the hole.
Well, and when you're sleep deprived, your resiliency mentally to stress
Mm-hmm.
perception is lower
Mm-hmm.
because you're sleep deprived. So,
Yes.
and I think everyone knows how that feels. You're just crankier, things get to you faster. It's like being like PMSing, It's just not good, not a good recipe. So, um, actually, it made me think of the client that I was mentioning and how we kind of pulled back. Like sleep was really suffering because of the stress, and everything was piling because of that. So my hope was, hey, let's give her some extra carbs. Like that's going to increase serotonin, get her to sleep a little bit better. Try to just pull back from like so much rigorous stuff that we can just sleep a little bit better too. And hopefully that compounding effect can reverse directions. So we'll see. I'll keep you posted. This was just 2 days ago. So
Yeah. Sounds like we need to talk about some clients after the podcast. But yeah, so like, and it's really, really hard because it's like all of these things start to compound and make things harder. So it's like, okay, my cortisol is raised. I am not, I don't have as much insulin sensitivity. I'm not sleeping as well. So it's throwing off my cravings, and I'm giving into, food that I wouldn't normally eat, but I'm hungry because my hormone levels are all off. And then it's tough because again, if we're staying in this elevated, like chronic state of stress, it's like, okay, we're also losing muscle, right? Like, and we're having that, like, so I feel like I'm losing muscle, like I'm storing fat. So like my body composition is poor. So it's like all of these things can make it really, really difficult. And so all this to say, like, obviously it's very important to mitigate stress, and really making sure that we're taking care of those things. So, um, I love kind of like the tactical side of things that we were talking about. It's like, okay, I get it. I'm stressed. I'm chronically stressed. Yes, I am. Like all of these things are happening to me. So like, now what? Now what do I do? Like, how do I pull myself out of this?
yeah, well, also too, because you mentioned losing muscle, and I was like, I don't think people know why that's happening. So
Mm,
what I had mentioned earlier about when your cortisol is raised and elevated for a period of time, you're mobilizing resources. That's actually the purpose of the hormone cortisol is not. I mean, it's labeled the stress hormone, but like what it actually does is it mobilizes resources in your body, like glucose, like anything to provide energy to help you fend off a threat. So, like the example that people always use with cortisol is if you're getting in your nervous system, is if you're getting chased by a bear, cortisol is going to spike up, your nervous system is going to turn on into fight or flight mode. And what's cortisol going to do? It's going to mobilize glucose from into the bloodstream so you have fuel to move and to be agile, to get away from that bear. It's going to mobilize neurotransmitters that keep you alert and focused and dilate your pupils so that you're like in on it, right? And so in a chronic state, like let's say eating low calories, not taking care of yourself, super stressed all the time, and under eating and not sleeping, and cortisol super elevated. Well, when it runs out of like the regular resources to mobilize, what's it going to mobilize then? And that's when it's going to start. If you're in that calorie deficit, your body's just going to start eating at whatever it can to mobilize energy. And unfortunately, muscle mass is something that can be broken down into proteins and therefore into energy through, honestly, not the most efficient process, but if your body needs to, it will take protein molecules and turn them into carbohydrates in the body to be used for energy. And so if you're under fueling for a chronic period of time and your cortisol is elevated and you're super stressed out, that's why you could be kind of eating away at your muscle mass. So again, it compounds. Like it's more likely when you're under eating rather than overeating. But yeah, it's definitely not a good recipe to improve your body composition. So even though the joke is, oh, I'm stressed out, I don't eat, like I lose weight, it's not the best kind of weight. So
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you talked about how that affects your metabolic rate earlier, but that's true because it's like if we're losing muscle, like, yeah, you can be eating the exact same amount as before, but if you're losing muscle, like that is going to change your metabolism and you might gain weight now with the amount that you're eating, even though
yeah.
you haven't necessarily changed anything. So it can really wreak havoc on your system and everything, and it just makes it so much harder to lose fat. So another client that I've talked about previously, and I think I've given this example before, is she was kind of everything that we were describing as far as like, I want to lose weight, I want to lose weight, I want, like, so focused on the outcome, was not enjoying the journey, was not like, that was not what she was there for. It was the outcome. And she was having a hard time hitting her protocols. Even though we were dialing them back, hey, let's just do this, let's just do this, let's just do this. She's like, I want to diet, I want to lose fat. And so we had to kind of sit her down and be like, if you are so stressed with work, you're not sleeping well, you're not able to hit your current protocols, if we enter a fat loss phase, we are going to add on more cardio. We are going to add on, or we're going to take away food. All of those things are going to contribute more to your stress. So, like, if you can't hit your like 1 20-minute cardio session this week, how do you think next week you're going to handle 2 or 3 or 4? Like, I mean, we wouldn't do that much, but it's like you're not going to be able to. Then you're going to be stressing about the fact that you're not able to hit your protocols even more, and all of these factors. Or even though, yes, technically you are in a dieting phase, you are not going to diet. You're not going to lose weight, and that will be even more frustrating. And you're just going to get really, really sick of the process because nothing is working for you. So that's really tough to kind of talk about, like, with clients. And, we always talk about like there is no perfect time to start, but there is, a good time or not a great time to diet. And like, I think that's when it comes down to clients and having to make informed decisions, right? So it's like, hey, if you are moving across the country and you're starting a new job and I don't know, you need to go car shopping and like you need to do XYZ and like do this and that you're in grad school. It's like maybe you have a lot on your plate right now. We just kind of coast and maintain for a while until things slow down a tiny bit and we are able to do some stuff. But yeah, it's just hard because when we diet or enter a fat loss phase, that is adding more stress to our body. And if we're already chronically stressed, it's just not going to work.
Yeah. Well, and I think an important distinction in that to make is that dieting is not the same as living a healthy lifestyle. So a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people don't know that difference. So you might hear that and be like, ah, shoot, you're right. Can't start, right? Because I'm going through X, Y, and Z. But there is a lot that I think most people can do through those turbulences of life, like drinking more water, trying to get your steps up a little bit, resistance training here and there, eating whole nutrient dense foods. Those things are going to most likely improve your body composition, also reduce the amount of stress on your body as a whole. When we say fat loss phase, we're talking, okay, we are diligently tracking macros. We are being very regimented with our protocols, like much more to a much higher extent than we would in just like a day-to-day lifestyle. So don't take that as like, oh, it's not a good time to be healthy. Like, no, being healthy reduces stress on your body. And if we go back to that pause button mentality episode where we talked about the volume dial, 0 to 10, it is always a good time to operate at a 5 out of 10. Always. And maybe sometimes you got to turn it back to like 4 or 3, and that's okay. You need to learn what those things look like because it's always important to do something rather than nothing. But a fat loss phase is operating at like an 8, a 9, right? And sometimes a 7, but like typically if we want to dial in, make progress, we want to turn the dial up. And so it is not always a good time to put your foot on the gas and be an 8 or 9 out of 10 all the time. So just wanted to be really, really clear about that, because not doing anything for your health during a stressful time will add to the stress that you're experiencing. And so it's not always a good time to enter a fat loss phase, but it is always a good time to take good damn care of yourself. And sometimes that's hard in the midst of the stressful things that you're going through. And it takes trade-offs and building in systems and trying to just make do with what you have. And it's still hard to make those things a priority, but those parts are worth it. They lower inflammation, improve metabolism, improve mental health through those seasons of stress. But you just got to find where you want to tune to in order to feel your best in any the best you can in any circumstance.
Yeah, I just listened to a really good episode that of Mind Pump. It was a podcast, and they were talking about how being a mom is not selfish, and or like being a mom and working on your health and fitness is not selfish, because sometimes that's the um uh oh,
Oh, that's weird. That was weird.
yeah, looks like we're still recording.
Yeah, I just let it roll. We can crop it together later.
Cool. All right. So I listened to a really good podcast episode the other day about how being a mom and working on your health and fitness isn't selfish, because that's a lot of the connotations that we have, and the mom guilt, and I'm not going to go into everything, but they were talking a lot about anxiety and depression and being stressed, and how a lot of times we feel like, oh God, I can't take time away from my kids because that's going to make me a bad mom. And so thinking about like, okay, but if I go and I get some steps in, or I go and I do a quick 20-minute workout, like the benefits that you're going to get from exercise and that self-care is so important, and is going to help you so much, so you are a better mom, you are a better wife, like you are not going to feel as stressed. And so kind of thinking about like, okay, yeah, like I might be taking time, 20-30 minutes away from my kid, but like, what about the quality? Like, would I rather have just the quantity, or would I rather have better quality where I'm more involved, I'm happier, I'm playing with my kids, I'm functional, I'm able to move, I'm able to get onto the ground because I am working on health and fitness. So like my kids are having a better time, like my energy is improved. And so it's like, yes, technically I'm spending time away, but it's going to help me in the long term. And I really just love the quantity versus quality aspect, because I think that that's something that we don't necessarily really think about. And we think that spending any time away is bad. But they were also talking about the benefits of exercising. And yes, we think that like strength based is the best, like resistance training, right? Building muscle, but just any type of exercise, whether that's a 20-minute walk, whether you're doing yoga, whether, whatever it is, just to move and just, again, be just like a healthy individual. Like they were talking about, they're like, if people could bottle up the results of exercise and put it into pill form, like all the anti-anxiety, antidepressant medications would just like go out the window. Like there's nothing that compares to exercise. And so it is really, really difficult when you are stressed and you feel like you don't have time, or you feel like you don't have this, but like just that alone can help so much and help mitigate all the stress that you're going through. And again, it doesn't have to be, 1 to 2 hours in the gym, you're beating yourself up, especially if you're stressed. We don't really want to add more onto that. So it's like, hey, let's just do yoga. Hey, let me just get outside and do a 10-minute walk. Like just small little things like that can really, really help.
Yeah. And it's more than enough. Like I think a lot of times we think, oh, it's not an hour in the gym. Like it is enough, especially in those seasons where everything is busy. Just do what you can. And that is so much better than like being hunched over a computer for longer, or, being on your phone while you're with your kids because you're too afraid to take time away from them, but you're not even with them in the first place. Or, what was the last one I was going to say? Or, being on the couch, like just watching TV and vegging away when you think that's going to relieve your stress, when really that's numbing yourself. And what you could do is go on a walk or move your body and actually reap some benefits. So, yeah. So hopefully you come away with from this with a couple of strategies that can help you kind of just see stress a little bit differently or understand it better, and give yourself a couple of tools, whether that be mental or tactical tools, to just navigate the stressors of life. Because I think one mantra that I always try to repeat to people is that stress doesn't go away. You don't get rid of problems, you just trade them. So, if stress is always going to be a part of our life, it's not about getting rid of it. It's about managing your responses to it, managing it as best you can, and doing everything you can to become resilient to it. So you can build yourself up, you can build the systems in your life, but you can't do anything to control things that are outside of your realm of control. So just remembering that and trying to do your best every day with what you have with that.
Yeah. And I'm going to go back. I know you've kind of stopped doing this a little bit, but bringing it back to like cold plunging, right? Or like starting your day
Just
off
started
with
it.
like, oh, okay. We just got one. I'm not able to do it quite yet, but
Yeah.
I'm tempted though, because it's like, oh, reduce inflammation. Like that
Just do your
sounds,
feet.
sign me up. I know. I told my husband that. I was like, I just want to stick my legs in, like just
Yeah.
stand there. But like the reason that they talk about is like, yes, there are a lot of physical benefits of cold plunging, but it's also the mental resiliency that you build from it. And like starting your day off with doing something hard, because it's like, okay, cool. Like I just did this like awful thing that I subjected myself to. It's not something that happened to me. Like I chose to do this. And then it's kind of like, okay, well, the rest of the day, like nothing's going to suck as much as that. Or like same thing, like how I would the feelings that I got from doing fasted cardio. It's like it wasn't the fact that I was doing fasted cardio. It was just the fact that I got up and started my day with something really hard, and I felt more accomplished the rest of the day. And so just kind of like, I think it can be really hard, especially if we're like working for home, right? We get up and we just like hop on our computer and like that's how we start our day. And like I just think that there are a lot of benefits from doing something kind of before you get into like your routine, and like how much that can prime yourself to be set up for being able to like more handle what life throws at you that day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, because I was even thinking like, even in your work day, open the laptop, do the hard thing first. It's something I've been struggling with, is like I'll avoid something for a while and then I'll get like anxious over it. So
Hmm.
today I did the hard things first and I felt really, really accomplished by midday. And so even like within your work, but I would agree that like doing something like physiologically, like for your body and your brain chemistry before opening a computer is going to be even better than that, as just
Yeah.
giving yourself that satisfaction.
Yeah, well, they talk a lot about like successful CEOs and how they start their days off. And a lot of it is not diving into work, it's getting up and like priming themselves. And again, I know this is like, okay, yeah, if I had like, this ideal day, the 2 hour morning routines, but a lot of them do start off with doing something physical first. And that kind of primes themselves to be in a creative or like a more productive state for the remainder of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be 2 hours. It could be 15 minutes, but just something.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. So, regular exercise, like making sure that you're doing like, meditation or deep breathing, like making sure you're having balanced meals and adequate sleep, like that can really help mitigate a lot of the negative effects that you have, like that stress can put on your body. And then the last thing that we didn't actually talk about, but makes a really, really big difference is having support from friends and family and having a support system. And that can, because it's like you can be doing all the things, but if you don't have support from other areas of your life, like that can really, really hold you back. So making sure that you're not neglecting those relationships or anything like that. And I think also it's important to like make sure that you know that you can seek additional help if you need it, like
yeah.
if you need guidance from someone else, because that can be really, really beneficial. Because I think specifically as women, like we try to do everything ourselves. We try to take care of everything. We try to be the ones, okay, I can do work, I can do childcare, I can take care of the house, I can do this, I can do that. And sometimes we can't, and it's okay to outsource or to say, hey, I'm really, really struggling, like I need help somewhere. So that social support and connection is really, really important and something we should have touched on earlier.
Yeah, well, I mean, it just comes down to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So the first, it's physiological needs, food, water, shelter, then safety and security, like health, employment, property, and then love and belonging is next up on the totem pole. So it's like if we, and basically the hierarchy of needs, if you don't know what that is, it's just a pyramid that shows like in order to kind of ascend and feel safe to like explore things like self-actualization and self-improvement and growth mindset, like kind of have to have the bases covered first. And so, physical health, physical well-being, like the stressors that threaten that, like job stress, that sort of stuff is at the bottom. But then like if you still don't have love and belonging and community and a sense of belonging to the community, people, others, then or support, then it's like you're still gonna kind of be limited in how you can progress, and how, yeah, how stress can kind of impact you, or how you can kind of move yourself along, because that's an essential part of being a human being. And without that, it's a stressor to be disconnected, to be isolated.
Yeah. Which is why we'll be talking in our next episode a little bit about work life boundaries and working from home, because I think that the internet has changed a lot with our relationships and community and in that sense of belonging. So we'll touch on that in the next episode.
Cool.
Awesome, guys. Well, we hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can find me on Instagram or find us. You can find me at Christina Fit, and Marissa is at Marissa Roy Fitness. Thank you guys so much for listening and hope to see you back next week.